Over the last year, Book of Hours has been there for you during the most challenging times of our lives. As an artist collaboration, we've given shape and depth to some of the most complicated topics of our time, making them easily accessible for those who seek to understand. We've given voice and space to the stories that often go ignored. Please take a moment to consider being a patron, make a donation, or join Rockfin. Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to Pull Quote.
Yes, welcome back to another edition of Pull Quotes.
Yeah, we had a week or two off, and so we're ready for another edition. Today we have a friend of ours named Ken.
Avidor.
Yeah, our friend. I know his name really well, Ken Avidor. He's an illustrator and cartoonist and artist. Basically, I have a bio right here. Ken Avidor is an avid everyday cyclist and sketch artist living with his wife Roberta, a painter. They both have studios at Circle City Industrial Complex in the Eastside of Indianapolis. That's in Indiana, United States. Mostly retired from cartooning, illustrating, and courtroom sketching, Ken is an author of Bicycyclopolis, which is right here, and now makes mostly grim dystopian animatic films using sketches. Welcome to Pull Quote. Ken, how you doing, man?
Hey, Ken.
Hello, JP and Julie.
Hi.
Thanks for having me on the show.
I want to thank you, before we get started, for sending us this beautiful book. I mean, it looks so professionally done. We got a really beautiful sketch from you on the inside with a personal note on the inside. And, I'm just so impressed with the artwork and the quality of the book itself. So thank you so much for gifting this to us. It really means a lot because we love graphic novels. We love cartooning, and that's one of the reasons why we felt it was so important to have you on, because with all of this craziness going on, it feels like the art community has been kind of pushed to the side.
Yes, and I by the way, Mutual Admiration Society here. I love your videos; they're fantastic, and I like you have an art background, so it's so much easier for me to relate, and particularly that video you did with C.J. Hopkins.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, CJ was wonderful to host.
I always love his interviews, but yours had that different perspective that he's a playwright, of course. And so I do want to talk about how the effect of everything that's happened, particularly in the last 2 years, about the arts.
Yeah.
The arts in particular.
Yeah.
Well, before we get too far into the conversation, I just wanted to say hello to our Rockfin viewers. We are one of the only artists
on Rockfin.
If the only artists on Rockfin. Everybody else is political pundits and sports people and
who
things
knows
like that.
What.
But all the same, that makes us unique, and so we're happy that you're on board and watching our programs. Thank you, Rockfin.
Thank you, Rockfin.
Yeah.
And our YouTube followers and those of you who have still hung in there on some of the other social media platforms, on our community pages, we want to thank you for following us there as well.
Yeah. But speaking of YouTube and I guess Vimeo too, you have, Ken, you have some videos on those platforms yourself. That's kind of we kind of, connected through that, I guess, through C.J. Hopkins and through your work.
Right.
And they're all over the place. There's 2 accounts on YouTube, and there's the account on Vimeo, which did not want, they censored my my unjabbed series.
Yes, we're familiar with being censored on Vimeo.
Yeah,
for sure.
They kicked us off completely. So
right. The difference, the reason why, and there's an article out there that I felt that my particular the video it's fiction. It's
Hmm.
an animatic. It's a cartoon, and they censored it because they said it was misleading. The usual disinformation,
Hmm.
misleading thing. But it's fiction, and
Right.
I thought that was now when people. I don't think censorship is. I'm a censorship opponent and First Amendment absolutist. I actually think you can should be allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater. That's how absolute I am. But fiction is definitely a red line for me.
Hmm.
If you're censoring fiction, but that's very common now. When that happened to me, that wasn't too long ago, it was months ago. Censorship was around. It was, definitely, of course, but now it's out of control,
Hmm.
and
Right.
it's only
Well,
going to get worse.
and they just make stuff up that you can't argue with either. I mean, we were told that our work promoted self harm, and we didn't have any. You told me earlier that somebody made a comment that after watching one of your videos, they wanted to slit their wrist, and we never got that.
Yeah, we never got that.
And as I told you, the kind of videos I make are not meant to be, popular. They in some of them, well, most of them, anyway. Everyone dies. Uh, so I took that comment. Where the fellow said, "This made me want to slit my wrist," as a compliment, because that's the kind of work I do. It's not a Hallmark card. It,
Hmm.
that's not what I do. But I don't expect to be, you know, to have success or wealth or fame from it. This is how I view the world.
Hmm.
Fortunately, I don't have to depend on that for income or anything. But there are people who appreciate what I do. It's much in uh, and this is the interesting thing for me about this. What we've gone through for the last 2+ years is I call it the event.
Hmm.
Other people have names for it, but that the arts have not. If you look at visual art, particularly as well as cinema, there's not a lot of depiction of the stuff that we went through. Uh, when all of this started happening, I immediately I do what's called urban sketching, which is I take my art to the street. I have a collapsible chair and I set it up. And before all of this, it was wonderful. The city I live in, Indianapolis, was full of crowds of people with happy and doing things, all interesting things, and it was fun to document that. It was all fun. If you see behind me, Roberta's painting here of
Yeah.
now this is a beautiful part of Indianapolis. It's called Monument Circle. It's the center of the city. It's called the Circle City. Uh,
Hmm.
this is right in the center, and on every weekend it was just full of people and happy. And then 2020 came along, and it became more disturbing and depressing with you know the gray world as this painting up, and you can show that later.
Yeah. Well, I can bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I
But
just want to. I want to interject also, Ken, as we look at this gray world at Roberta's gray world. First of all, kudos to Roberta and Winter Oak for using this
Well,
piece
yeah, yeah.
in one of Winter Oak's piece, and many of our followers follow Winter Oak as well,
Hmm.
so they'll be able to make that connection. But one thing, coming from a personal perspective, JP and I are a married couple that have a similar outlook and a similar worldview regarding the event and the COVID prevailing narrative, which is that we're critical of the prevailing narrative. And it's really refreshing to see another married couple in that same position, because I'm also friends with people that I've met throughout the last few years that are in the middle of divorcing because they're not on the same page in response to the prevailing narrative. So it's really refreshing to me to meet more artistically minded people that are staying together and producing work together in the same way that JP and I are collaborating and producing work together. So I think that's really rare, and I wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted to recognize that.
Oh, thank you. And I guess that's why I just so much enjoy talking to you because I wish you were our neighbors. Uh,
I know it
so
would
many
be
people,
fun.
right? So many people that we were formerly friends with and had just a wonderful time sitting on their porch discussing everything. We no longer know these people. We've lost them because it felt like walking through a minefield after a while.
Yeah.
Um, there was one friend of Roberta's who accused, when she found out I was unvaxxed, she accused me. She was a school teacher, and she accused me. She just straight out said, "You're killing my children. You're a murderer." This
Wow.
thing is actually fairly common, and I'm very careful with people now. Not with you. I can.
Yeah, of course.
I,
I
I don't feel like if I mention something we disagree with, that you're going to, um, reach for your gun.
No.
well, I find that I pull my punches in conversations, figuratively. Um, I'm vague about things, about, whatever position I take about things, much more now than ever before.
Yeah.
I've always been, on the outside of mainstream politics or culture. And so I've always, done that just in general because I just don't feel like getting into it most of the time.
Right.
I'm not a kind of person who likes to argue. So I just I don't get into it. I have my personal politics, and if people are interested, I talk about it. But it's even more so now than ever before. I just don't say anything. I think the closest thing I came to saying anything was I was in an Aldi once in line, and some woman, God, what was it? Oh, she asked me. She was behind me in line. She says, "Did you get your vax? Did you get your vaccine?" And I said something like,
I
"Did
know
you
what you said.
did you have your bowel movement this morning?" And
It's
she
like none of
said,
your business.
she kind of like looked at me, and I said, "Well, did you have your bowel movement this
Yeah,
morning?" And the reason I ask is because it's none of my business.
Right.
exactly.
And
Right.
Well,
she started
uh,
laughing. She actually thought that was the funniest damn thing she'd ever heard.
Yeah, she was. She responded well to it.
Yeah.
well,
That's
so
good.
I keep journals that go
Yeah.
all the way back, and so I draw in them. And this particular drawing, can you see it?
Yeah,
Okay.
there you
Right.
go.
So what's depicted there is we went to demonstrations that were largely, um, you know, they were right wing for the most part. That
Yeah.
our former affinity group was more liberal because that's the art world. It was,
Right.
people own galleries and run museums and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
But they rejected us completely because of the bodily autonomy problem, which is they suddenly decided that your body wasn't your own, to it would belong to everyone.
Except for 2 weeks ago. But, that's another.
Well, that's the interesting thing. So our affinity group used to be, the folks. Yeah, it changed. I previously, in my previous incarnation, which I haven't changed. It's everything else
Right.
is.
Mm.
I
Right.
used to think that I wrote a book, co-authored a book with other people about the former Congressman and presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann, and she kind of pioneered a lot of this kind of tribal way of thinking about politics.
Mm.
She was very corrupt. That's something that people didn't understand about her, and her corruption involved a Ponzi schemer, and that's in the book. Well, I'm not going to, but
Okay.
everything is not as you see. I'm glad you had that wonderful discussion with Paul Kudnick about, and you mentioned Cory Morningstar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of what mainstream media are the propaganda that we get, and it's become much worse. But we've been getting it for a while, that there are things, green technologies, and we're bringing democracy to countries with bombs and that sort of thing. Has been going on for quite a while. And by the way, C.J. Hopkins has the best description. So I'm not going. I'll defer to him on that and really talk about the art thing. But one thing that was very important about how C.J. Hopkins helped me personally is we had a horrible time in 2020. It was it was hitting us from every direction,
Wow.
and it was hard to it and we we wanted to make sense of it. So I decided I was going to get out of the where I was getting my information largely from Twitter. You get a basket of information and
Hmm.
you see what has the ring of truth. It's a lot of work, but
Yes.
we weren't listening to mainstream media. Haven't done that for quite a while.
Right.
And you know that when you're talking to someone who gets all their information from mainstream media, it's a completely different worldview.
It is. Hmm.
So I went out on. I love to do chalk drawing. I do fun chalk drawing. I
Hmm.
used to. Anyways, I'm going to get back into that. But so I went out and I said, I'm going to write on the street, because I believe in doing things local. I write on the sidewalk how I feel about this thing. I believed it for 2 weeks. I thought, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, all that stuff, until I read about, the Bill Gates connection and all that
Hmm.
stuff. So I wrote on the sidewalk some things that I felt I was critical of this new the new world order kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I didn't expect anyone would see it actually because it was in an out of the way area, but it got erased. So I go back out and do it again, and then an amazing thing happened. I always take a picture and then I put it on Twitter, which is amazing thing happened. Somebody did an annotation of it all, detailed in colored chalk in the very there it is, there it is.
Yeah.
And by the way, yeah. So but my prediction was that I said that it starts with the mask, and then you get the jab, and then eventually it ends with war,
Right.
and
Wow.
and
Yeah.
you can see the annotation there. This person really, really hated me. So
Yeah.
I sent this to CJ, and I said, well, what's going on here? And he said probably the most important thing anyone said to help me understand. He said, if that person was given permission by the authorities to kill you, he would.
Hmm.
That's awful. Yeah. I
And
mean,
now I
it's
know.
it's not awful that he said it because there's a ring of truth to it. It's just awful
That person. Well, go on.
that we're coming to that place in
Right.
society now where it's it's like 1984 with your 2 minutes of hate, and there's
Exactly.
just blood, in their eyes, and they're just
Hmm.
out for blood. It feels like, in certain circumstances, I do have to say that I have met plenty of people who are on the so-called wrong side of history. They believe the prevailing narrative, and they're perfectly respectful. It's like we dance around different subjects. We can have decent conversations.
That's rare, though.
But there are people who have taken up the kind of behavior that we just witnessed with your chalk drawing, where they responded to it with something really, really base,
Hmm.
and it's
Um,
really scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that everyone, myself included, I know this, that we all have the capacity to do tremendously evil, horrible things. And I think we all feel restrained
Yeah.
by taboos. This society gives us taboos that we work inside of a framework, but within us, we all have the capacity to do absolutely the most horrible things. How do we know that? Well, there's history, and
Yeah.
I did a lot of reading of history in the last 2.5 years, large recommended by people like CJ. Very good books about what happened in the Weimar and in the Nazi period. But the part we're in right now is more like the Weimar, and I think more relevant is the story of what happened in France after it was occupied. Not all occupied. There's the Vichy part. If you can find a good book about that Vichy, the period of Vichy, um, the unoccupied part of France that was collaborating with the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to now, because in the beginning, people overwhelming support for Marshal Pétain and his collaborationist government, because people were just sick of war. They went through a lot, and everyone was very anxious. You've heard this term, mass formation psychosis, um, but in this case, it was that people they were just complying. They were defeated, and they just went along with it. They couldn't imagine anything worse than what happened to them. This seemed like the solution in the beginning. So there was no resistance in France back then, virtually none.
Right.
That grew. And by 1944, it was very hard to find people who would describe themselves as supporters of the Vichy. They were all resistance. The French could not talk about that experience after the war until the 1970s. And there was a movie called, this slipped my mind, but there was people felt by the 1970s they could start talking about how they collaborated with the Germans during World War II, how the resistance grew, and so it's very similar to now. It's not a cut and clear thing. I will say that I did support for about 2 weeks until I have. That's one of the reasons I have journals. I do have in one of my journals the actual moment when I realized that this thing was not exactly as they said it was. It was when I found out that Congress people were some Congress members were trading on the stock market in response to the briefing that they got about the COVID scare. And
right.
that doesn't sound like, that doesn't sound like how people would react if something was truly as, I read the Imperial College, Neil Ferguson.
Oh, right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that and it said something like 6%. I'm not sure the actual percentage, but 6% of the world would perish.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Great.
I mean, I immediately went into survival mode because,
yeah.
There was a lot.
Wow. What a crazy time that was, right?
But when I figured out that it wasn't, but it kept going on, and it was serving all these alternate purposes, the purposes of nonprofits, and now we have a completely different world. And I was talking to an artist there. That's from my journal. It's that is not. It's a little cartoony, but it's absolutely accurate.
So that was a real person that you sketched?
Yes,
was this a real individual?
What you're seeing there is someone on a cargo bike, and so this is my affinity group, people who ride bikes, and we have a wonderful bike trail in Indianapolis, urban bike trail. It's absolutely gorgeous. It has gardens, so we have a nice. It didn't exist before because we were largely a Rust Belt town that decided at one point to try harder. And so this is the example. So this is a person who probably like ourselves, does not have a car and relies on their bike to go shopping like we do. But she's decked out in, she has her helmet, of course we don't.
Yeah.
She's got a helmet and she's got her mask and she's outdoors on her bike and she's got a pool noodle, one of those to keep people.
And gloves too.
And gloves.
And the surgical. I mean, what do they call them?
Not biking gloves.
No, the blue. Thanks for. Yeah, this is why I like to sketch, because you capture the stuff. I couldn't.
Right.
You can't make this up. And she has the sign on the front. She really did. That says "Stay 6 feet apart."
Right. So. Can I just interject something very quickly for our audience? Because most of our audience is not of the bicycling or cycling community. And I just want to interject something that JP brought and I talked about, but he brought it up ultimately. This was before we brought you on today. This particular cargo bike is thousands and thousands of dollars. We see these kinds of cargo bikes in San Francisco all the time, and they are the cost of like a cheap car. So what I'm looking at when I see this sketch that you so beautifully depicted is I'm looking at a class analysis. Somebody very, very privileged with tons of money to put into one of the most expensive bikes on the market, and they're custom made, is now, following these ridiculous orders with pool noodles and a mask over her face. And to cycle with a mask on your face is probably more detrimental to your health than anything, because you really do need to breathe in oxygen when you're working it, when you're on the bicycle. These cargo bikes are heavy. So what I saw, because of the perspective that I come from in this world, what I saw was an incredibly privileged, out of touch individual who was not only showing off her wealth, but then dictating what should be, like what is and what isn't. Stay 6 feet apart, you peasants. Stay away from me, poor people who can't afford cargo bikes. You are diseased and you are carrying a pathogen.
And these people, if you tell people like this that you're dictating your rules to me, they would turn around and saying, yeah, but you're now turning around, you're dictating your rules not to wear a mask to me. And it's weird how they do this strange jujitsu. I've seen it on on comment threads and and in real life too. It's really remarkable.
So I don't know if that's exactly the point of your sketch with this particular one that really resonated with me personally, but that was my takeaway. So I just wanted to interject that.
Well, that's why I'm so enjoying this talk with you, because you hit the nail on the head. You saw more in there than I saw, but you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. All of this was a largely, from my perspective, they saw it as sort of that they were sacrificing something, kind of a crusade, a children's crusade, where they were.
Interesting, yeah.
So it's that, but there's also the punishing thing. They're punishing you. So if you're a deplorable, and the people who were suffering the most at that time, at a particular time, were nurses. They're working hard and whatever. Though when I was mugged and they broke my leg,
oh my God.
I went to the ER, and it wasn't busy like they were saying. It was packed with people.
Right.
Packed with people. It's like, no, it's like normal. And by the way, the ER they were wonderful, and I'd say, do I have to wear this mask? Go ahead, pull it down. But
that was nice of them. Yeah, here you are in pain.
There was so much of that weird kabuki theater. The wearing of, but getting back to this thing, I did want to mention that when I posted this drawing of the gal. Now she was a Christian, and she has her sign, and it says, my body, my choice. So I put that on. I'm not on Facebook anymore because that was insane, but I'm still on Twitter and Instagram. Probably not for long, but I posted that picture. I have hardly anybody follows me or notices, but I put that picture on. The few liberals who still follow me, I said, yeah, right on. My body, my choice. They thought that was about abortion. And the other people, the medical tyranny, more Christian and right wing, so ironic. They said, yeah, bodily autonomy, no jab. It's like,
wow,
this is where we are right now. And then, of course, with that leaked Supreme Court decision, the Roe stuff, the people who I respect, my new affinity group, which is the anti-jab mandate folks, they went completely berserk with the baby killing stuff.
Right.
Like, okay, here somebody tweeted, I loved it. They said the loneliest place to be right now is anti-jab mandate and pro-choice.
Yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah, and
or at least I am.
Julie did a commentary. She does audio commentaries on Facebook occasionally, and this was one of the ones she's like basically yelling at both sides.
Yeah, I basically said, if you don't unclench, if the if the pro-lifers or whatever don't unclench and understand that sometimes we do need to terminate our pregnancies for whatever reason, and it's really up to the woman's choice. And so if you don't unclench a little bit, then you're going to lose everything. And it's the same with the people who are,
Pro jab.
pro jab. Like, if you are saying that everybody needs to get out there and get vaccinated, then you're going to lose everything as well. So you both need to unclench a little bit, is what I said.
Yeah. Well, people are. I'm just astounded, but no, not very much longer. But interestingly enough, move a little bit back to art.
Yeah.
I have done cartooning and illustration, but the only place that I do stuff anymore is French publication called. Give a shout out to La Décroissance.
Wow. So we have some French-speaking followers who are going to feel very good about this.
Oops. So that's a cover I did.
Wow.
And I did another. I have a poster but in France they have a very different approach to comics. I'm a cartoonist.
Mm-hmm.
They have a range of subjects that they call them dessinateurs. They're not cartoon. We have this horrible word, cartooning. It's a comics. We invented the art form, but we've neglected it. And in France, of course, wonderful people that they have rescued it and preserved it, as they've done with jazz and other things.
Of course, right.
They celebrate the things that we just throw in the garbage. What we have is this kind of Marvel DC comics world that is really dominant here.
Right.
It's you may recall that I hate this phrase that not all heroes wear capes. It's like,
oh God, I know, right?
Oh, it's a Manichaean duality universe here in America. You're either all good or you're all bad.
Right.
And then there's this like Marvel thing where like you're a good person, but you do bad things.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And justify the means. You're this very serious Batman guy who does like really horrible things. But he's basically a good guy. Yeah, it's sort of like like we go around the world doing. We're basically good people, though we're bombing and doing terrible, overthrowing governments and stuff like that. But
right,
good people.
Yeah, those things they really reflect.
There's a range. There's a range of things you can do with comics. And they're really good cartoonists, but they don't all do one thing like what they do here. And the industry is varied. And the Bicyclopolis book is published in French in France.
Cool.
And you can find it there, but you can't buy it here in America. You can only buy it there. And La Décroissance is in France, so you can see I feel like they kept wonderful jazz musicians alive. They treasure them over there, American jazz musicians. So.
Well, I noticed the book you sent us is in English.
Yeah.
I published that here, but it's published in France because nobody here will publish that because nobody's interested.
Right. You were talking about how here, it's like a lot of superhero stuff mostly, but there there is that undercurrent of comics and graphic novels and things. And one of the things that reminded me of is this book, Understanding Comics. Have you ever seen this
book?
Isn't this a great book?
Yeah.
And I like it because, he talks about that. In fact, he's like, I wasn't into the caped crusader types. I just, that wasn't my thing, even though his character that that Scott McCloud developed was like, sort of a superhero, but everyday guy, and, if any of you are interested, this is a book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. And it talks about, setting up stories through visual storytelling, right? And
absolutely wonderful book. Very, it really helped me to understand my own work.
Good. Yeah. Glad to see we have that affinity. That
Right.
reading the same things.
We're an affinity group of right now 3 people. So
Basically, it feels like
I'm
it.
waiting. I'm waiting for me to step on some kind of landmine, but
Oh no.
I don't think it's going to happen with you guys.
With us,
And
no, it's not possible.
it's nothing that you can't talk. But getting back to I have a friend who's an artist, and one of the few left that I can talk to. But he listens to NPR.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, so his worldview is very, very. But credit to him, he's still friends with me, and he's still, we can still have a good conversation, though it kind of runs in odd directions. Um, he's like, a part of that world. But one thing he said to me, and this is very true, and this is one of the things that this is the thing I really wanted to talk to you about, is how I asked. We stayed away from a lot of things that I knew that would be contentious, but he said at some point, I just do what the editor asks me to do.
Hmm.
Like I'm following orders.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I don't want it to be mean or anything, but I find that a lot of places that artists, I wrote something that I used to be on Blogger and now I'm on Substack, but
Mm-hmm.
hardly anybody reads me anyways, but that's okay. So I posted something called about at the beginning of this thing, I actually like shouted out to people like, this is a great opportunity for artists to be, Goya or Picasso doing Guernica, like, you had a great video about,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't see it. People weren't doing, they were drawing they were sketching their breakfast. They're doing nice pictures of like landscapes. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing
Sure.
wrong with that.
Right.
It's that at this time, that seemed kind of a waste. I mean, I was out there sketching the aftermath of the riot here.
Right.
Um, I
We wanted to bring your Substack up so that people could know where to follow you. So
okay,
you can get
and
more followers.
I will have more in the future. It's just that I'm very busy right now with my films, but
Sure.
you can find my films there. It's nice. I think it's much better than Blogger, so I'll be there from now on.
Okay.
But
Um,
I have a thing there that I wrote called the year artist um, uh, uh, surrendered to their monkeys,
Oh yeah, right here. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
and it refers to it. There's a wonderful book by a great artist, urban sketcher, Danny Gregory, and it was. I forget the name of the actual, but he refers to this thing called the monkey. And if you're an artist, you know what it is.
Mhm.
It's that little voice in you that says you're no good.
Right.
Don't bother. You can never be. You will. I mean, I hear it all the time. The little voice in my head that says you'll never be Michelangelo, and I think like, but I don't want to be Michelangelo.
Right.
Basically, it's this thing that says, no, you forgot how to draw.
Right.
I
Right.
remember I was looking at the sketchbook of a very wonderful artist, and I was looking through it, and it's just absolutely the best drawings. And all the time I'm looking at them saying, I will never learn how to draw this good. And then there was one drawing that was just fabulous. And at the bottom, he wrote, when will I ever learn how to draw? So we all have that voice that tells us that we're terrible. It serves its purpose because what it does is it tells us it's like inner critic.
Right.
So you can do better. That's when it works properly. It's just, you can do
Right.
better than this. That shape is terrible. Uh, that's not what That's not what
Hmm.
that's not what a tree looks like, you idiot.
Right.
But then it can go too far, and a lot of times that's what stops people from being artists and musicians. It's just that little voice, or actors go through much worse because they walk out on stage and there's all these people looking at them,
Yeah.
and they have to perform, and they get stage fright, which is
Yes.
you know. You get the adrenaline, the tunnel vision. You forget what your lines are.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I've read that there are actors who, before they go on stage, they have to throw up because they're so paralyzed with
Yes.
the monkey.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2020 happens, and what they're told is you have this other purpose, which is to be, you're serving the rest of the world by not performing,
Yeah.
or you're not, you're serving the world by not going out and drawing what's really going on. And also, people need to be uplifted, and you have to do what people, and you're gonna like step in that minefield somewhere. You're gonna step on the wrong thing if you just do what you want.
Right.
You're gonna offend people, and then there was this kind of like thing that goes on with all propaganda in times of war, is you can only do happy things, and
Right. Yeah,
Right.
like during the Depression with all the movies, the dance musicals,
Right.
which are wonderful, but they were,
They were over the top, lavish, like just these explosions of money and wealth and
right.
privilege in the middle of the Great Depression.
Yeah, to distract people.
Crazy.
what the line. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's a very good example. I think there's only two films about the Depression that were made during the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Grapes of Wrath,
Yeah.
and I think there was one other, but
yeah, I can't think of the other one, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
a few, and good ones, but there should be more, right? I mean, this is what was happening. There's, and if you look at the, in history, like Guernica is a very good example of Picasso. And the interesting thing about that one, we were talking earlier about art. What is the best depictions? Is it a realistic? I've seen a lot of realistic pictures of bombings, including one of Guernica, and it doesn't have the same effect that Picasso's Guernica has, because
Right.
what he was doing was how he felt inside.
Right.
mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so now when we think of that, that is the iconic picture of the terror of bombing.
Right.
And this is, Roberta's Gray World.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Here, I can bring that up again.
Yeah. I love the sound of the train in the background.
Oh yeah, you can hear that. That's great.
I
Yeah,
love it. Yeah.
I love the train. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we have a lot of trains in the city. It's the crossroads of the world.
Right.
I mean,
Gray World. It's right here.
Yeah.
It's great.
We get a lot of trains here too.
A lot.
Our little part of Pittsburgh was a crossroads as well in this particular area. But here's Gray World again. Yeah.
Yeah, here's Gray World again.
Yeah.
So you found yourself sort of, doing similar to what Roberta did here, which is that you found yourself describing what you felt, and it wasn't necessarily, really cool pictures of your food. It was something a little darker than that, right?
Right.
Right.
And I think now that people have that, we're starting to get that perspective. People are beginning to like say, what happened? Much the same way as like in the 1970s, that people were in France were allowed finally to talk about that horrible period, the Vichy period.
Right. Yeah.
It's very kind of different from what happened in Germany, because we forced them to confront that very early on after the war. Very good book about that called They Thought They Were Free. Have you read that
Right.
book?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Very interesting book. I think CJ recommends that book.
Yes.
And it's an interesting book because it's a lot about the Cold War and how we wanted the Germans to join us, to remilitarize pretty much, and join us in that crusade. But were these people, how responsible were these people for the atrocities that happened? Can you really concretely, definitely say that you did this? And then can you, if you do, can you apply that to yourselves? Did you object? I mean, in 2020, we had a neighbor who was struggling with heroin addiction. We didn't know that, but we knew that she was a young mother, and there was just it was just a struggle with her family, and suddenly she disappeared. What happened to her? Would that have happened if? Did she have a chance before 2020 when they forced her to be alone? With her toddlers who were like, and she couldn't go playgrounds. Remember, they had yellow tape on the playgrounds.
Sure, right.
So she's stuck in her apartment. We had curfews, so we had lockdowns, and
Wow.
what that did to the most vulnerable people,
Mm-hmm.
people with mental illness, people with drug problems, people drug, alcohol. Churches were closed, but
Yeah.
liquor stores are open.
Right.
To me, that was an atrocity. People died. People lost their livelihoods. People lost jobs, and we know that. And thank God there are people on. I don't know if you've noticed a recent trend on Twitter is people reminding.
Yeah.
Remember when this happened. Remember when they dumped sand into the skate parks. So
Right. Right.
remember
Mm-hmm.
when they arrested people for being on the beach.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm really glad that there are people that are still, bringing up those things that happened in 2020. I noticed that, when human beings get really stressed about something, their memory goes away. They have short-term memory loss, and there are people that don't even remember all of the, pardon my French, all the bullshit that was that we had to deal with in 2020. I mean, the stuff that we were told. I don't mean to be crass. I don't mean to be gross, but there was even in Canada, the Canadian Health Department had promoted, what's it called?
Glory holes.
Glory holes. I mean, at that point, if people weren't sort of waking up, and this was in 2020, right? If people weren't waking up and saying, okay, wait a minute, this is too weird. But people weren't. They actually took it seriously. And now, because so many things have happened, here we are in the middle of 2022, so many things have happened over the last 2+ years that people forgot, And so
we've also moved on to the current thing, which is war.
Right. And that's,
possibly nuclear war.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm
but
glad to see people reminding,
Yeah.
Hey, remember this photo from 2.5 years ago? Remember this?
And walking. Remember when we had to follow arrows and stand on dots and the plexiglass? It was, but there's a feeling now of like there's all this crazy stuff happened, and they know it was crazy because we're not doing it anymore. And it's like, but then sometimes we are, and it may all come back. And
I know.
There's a wonderful movie. I think I mentioned it before. It's a movie called Compliance. It was made. And it's about a real event that actually happened where a fellow, a real pervert, obviously, would call up fast food restaurants and ask for the manager and pretend he was a police officer, and would dictate. Would say, "Well, we don't have enough police here. You have to do this for us," and would say, "One of your employees is stealing money, and we're going to kind of deputize you to do our investigation." And of course, the investigation would require, undressing, having the person undress and
humiliate themselves.
Yeah, and humiliate themselves. And it went really far. And it actually happened in a number of places, a number of states.
Yeah.
You can look this up on Wikipedia. It's amazing, amazing. But the movies did a very good job. The title, Compliance, is totally
perfect. Yeah, it was about the last event. I read the Wikipedia entry, and it was something that went on for like a series of these things for over like around 10 years,
right?
And or 10, 12 years, and it was clearly the same guy, because once he got arrested and taken to court, the incident stopped.
Right.
Now, he was never found guilty, but the thing that's really frustrating and scary about that is the guy that instigated the whole thing, that caused the problems, walked away free. And some of the people who complied in this particular case, and it was in Mount Washington, Kentucky, that this incident took place. The one guy got prison.
Right. for following orders.
For following orders.
Right.
Right.
You know, and
the victim, the young gal who
got nothing.
worked at the restaurant, her life was destroyed.
Her life is destroyed. She got hardly any compensation from a multi-billion-dollar corporation that could have easily, set her up very nicely for the rest of her life to pay for the damages and the level of psychological breakdown in her life as a result of being ritualistically humiliated by an order follower. And I think so for you to I've never heard anybody else conflate like what happened in 2020 and what sort of continues to happen today, conflate that with this really powerful story about the dangers of compliance. I've never seen anybody else
maybe compare
make those two comparisons, not conflate. Yeah, make those two comparisons. And I just want to commend you for that as well, because early on, I was pulling my hair out saying, why are school nurses telling little children to put on a mask? Why are school teachers suddenly berating children for not putting on their mask or sitting 6 feet apart? And then came the injections, and through the CARES Act and ESSER funding, schools suddenly became injection sites and testing sites. And it spun out of control, this idea that these school teachers and these school nurses that get paid maybe $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year are suddenly in compliance with these multi-billion-dollar testing agencies, tech companies, pharmaceutical companies. And I'm just like, stop it. Just say no. Just stop. Take your ESSER funding, give it back to the government. Take the CARES Act money, give it back to the government. Do not continue this humiliation and this torture on innocent children. Like I was appalled, and I'm still appalled because it's still happening. So
that incident and the movie that was made of that incident really does explains a lot. I don't want to ruin the ending, but I'll ruin the ending. But it's not important then. But in the end, she's talking to after the event, talking to an investigator or reporter, and she starts talking about her vacations. This is where we are right now. Everyone's talking about, I'm going to go to, I'm looking forward to going on vacation and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, wait a minute, there was this terrible thing that you did.
right.
But if everyone's people are familiar with the Milgram experiment, it's kind of the same thing. We've been all in this giant Milgram experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And if you recall, they were surprised that people not only complied, but were very eager to up the amperage on the victims. They were asked, raise the amperage and shock them, and they'd see the people screaming, and very few of them said I don't want to do this anymore. That person's really getting hurt. A lot of them said, should I up the amperage?
Right,
exactly. That's the interesting part for me. It's like when CJ said that person, if given permission, would do great harm to you. Would kill you. We see this in other incidents like Abu Ghraib.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Roberta and I have this. When we were doing commercial art, we had this thing that we would call this. We called it the banjo effect. Like if you've ever been to a bluegrass concert. Somebody will start strumming the banjo and people start clapping along with the rhythm. And after a while, you don't hear the banjo anymore. All you hear is the clapping.
Right.
And so we call that the banjo effect. So if you go to a meeting and, you take out your sketch, this is the product and this is how they're going to, and then all the creative types, they start saying oh, how about if we add this and we put this? I'm sure you've had this experience.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can we do this? And after a while, it's like, I'm sorry, this was going to cost you this much, and now it's going to cost you a million times more because you've just added an entire cast of thousands and CGI and everything else. It's like, and originally it was just
a simple thing.
Right.
One guy, holding up the product.
Right.
And now it has, but I think that what happens a lot of times is people they gave people the order that you're going to have to. And you might have noticed this. You need to keep people 6 feet apart, and they would say, they didn't say like, tell us how to do that. Maybe they did, but then they all decided to figure it out themselves. So every different place had different kinds of dots and arrows and everything else. It's like the banjo effect. Really, they really got into it, and that's also in that movie Compliance. Is that
yeah,
she would start asking like, should I should, she's I took off her shirt. Should her pants come off too?
Right. Oh God.
Yeah. Should I do more?
Yeah.
What if I did that? Yeah, I noticed that too.
So it doesn't just. So people have this really, warped idea that they would always do the right thing, when in reality, what this entire experiment has shown us is that people will continue to push it to the limit. It's like, oh, well, you want me to wear one mask? Should I wear 2? How about 3? How about a mask that makes me look so ridiculous and humiliates me that 20 years from now, my grandchildren are going to look back at me and laugh with, those Donald Duck masks. My friend in New York calls them the Donald Duck masks, and they stick out and then they make you look like you have a duck bill. How much more can I please humiliate myself? Is what people are asking.
It's a weird aspect of human psychology, and I don't completely understand it, and I don't know if I want to understand it. It's icky. Well, but yeah, they how much can I debase myself, and then there's also how much can I impose on other people this debasement.
And I think that right there is the kernel of truth. Is this all comes down to authority and how people respond to authority. And I think we recently, and I'm going to tie these two ideas together. We recently saw the movie The Northman, which is about Vikings. Apparently, it's not real. It's not based in reality because we know it was a fantasy. It was a fantasy movie, yeah. And it was about how people will. If left to your own devices, without authority, you will kill each other and create mayhem, and your society will spin out and it will become cannibalistic and all this crap, right?
Which isn't true at all.
Which isn't true at all.
That's not how human beings operate.
If they are left to their own devices, generally, people work out ways of cooperating, and this is something Darwin pointed out: is the species that survive are the ones that cooperated, right?
Yeah.
Now you take this mask thing, and it's also a narrative that's being pushed forth, just like the idea of without authority, you're going to kill each other. Now it's with authority, you will follow orders, and you will do what we tell you, and not only that. If we give you a little authority, you will do even more than what we tell you.
Right.
And it's showing us that humans are awful creatures in either case. And it's presenting this as the only narrative that's out there, that people are left to their own devices, and even when we're being told what to do, they will be even more hideous.
Yeah, I've had this. Something I've also is that I talked about that I had an affinity with the professional managerial class or liberals.
Yeah, well, we mixed and mingled with that class for most of our lives.
Right. And but that I don't have, so I was never tribal, and that's
right.
What we're seeing now is a kind of a tribal cult-like quality to, so you don't ask questions, you do as you're told, and if you can contribute something crazier, then you get the little likes on your social media.
Right.
So we're seeing this kind of weird, right out of every, I've seen a Venn diagram where every dystopian book over the last, and in the middle, you are here.
Right, and you are here, right.
I mean, we all read Lord of the Flies in high school, didn't we? I mean,
Yeah.
Maybe they don't do that anymore, but that it's all about that. It's all about like what happens when you set up a kind of organization, an authoritarian kind of thing. Inevitably, it comes down to you know kill piggy. You know, we know that history tells us that, our literature tells us that, and we've decided to throw that all in the dustpan and just make it all up. And what we're getting is this extreme authoritarian thing that's really actually better described by CJ as the globo cap.
Mm-hmm.
It
Global
doesn't
capitalism.
have it doesn't have an ideology. It really
Right.
doesn't.
No.
People don't get that. Is that you don't need ideology
Yeah.
anymore to impose.
Capitalism has no ideology. Right.
Right.
Capitalism has no conscience. You know.
Or capitalism doesn't, it will sell the rope that hangs itself. It doesn't follow any kind of logical thing. It's a very self-destructive thing.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And yet, people, it's interesting that, and I've pointed this out before, is that the narrative that we all operate within, or the sort of the worldview, or the what's the word I'm thinking of, the paradigm
Mm-hmm.
that we all operate within is in the world of a capitalist society, right? And so a lot of times you'll see critiques of things going on, but it misses the mark because it doesn't go far enough to say this is the result of living in a capitalist society,
Right.
And I think going along with what we were talking about before we started recording, is that we were, Ken, as we were talking about, um, you know the green technologies, not really being all that, but not
Green,
going, actually doing the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing, right?
Right.
And they're operating within the context, or paradigm of capitalism. This whole idea of sustainability and green capitalism, and I was tied up in that in the
Mm-hmm.
early part of the 20th century or 21st century. I was in that crowd, and I started realizing that they were just reinventing the same shit that they were trying to go against,
Right.
right? And their critique was not within was missing the context of capitalism. It was actually promoting capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
but we're being less bad.
oh yeah, and if the best exploration of all that is Cory Morningstar's work.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have, I have had my own experience with the green technology. Uh, I don't. I consider myself an environmentalist, but I don't do the call to action thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't tell people get out in the streets, be Greta Thunberg, and all that stuff. No,
Right.
Yeah.
it's it, we need to understand our place in the world, and part of that is our very complicated relationship with nature
Mm-hmm.
and with other human beings and other creatures and the universe in general. That's an exploration thing. That's not an investment thing or donate
Right.
thing or march in the streets thing. It's like just do some research and
Mhm.
really try to understand. Get out there in the woods and really see if you can survive.
Right.
I
Yeah.
used to do a lot of backpack camping. I mean, I do think that you're not going to save the world, but you actually learn something about yourself and how you relate to the world, uh, by putting. And that's like do some backpack camping. Find out how much wood it takes to cook your
Mm-hmm.
food,
Hmm.
or the things you have to bring in so you don't use wood. You have to bring in stuff on your back. Try that sometime. You'll have a different relationship to the world around you.
For sure.
Um, and that's why people say, "Why do you?" Well, very rarely did they ask me. I mean, practically nobody asks you anything anymore. They just tell you. But
That's true.
when they used to ask me, they said, well, "Why do you ride a bike all the time? Why don't you have a car?" And I used to drive, and sometimes, now and then we rent a car. Roberta and I. She usually does it because I'm a terrible driver, but we we, um, we ride a bike as artists because it gets us more in touch with our surroundings. I experience the world differently when I'm
Mm-hmm.
in a car.
Mm-hmm.
or when I'm walking. Walking is different than biking. I see more when I walk. I experience more. When there's a lilac blooming, I smell it.
Yeah.
I know it's spring because I just smell the lilac, and that
Hmm.
Hmm.
brings back memories of things because the
Yeah.
smells are so good. And I can't draw something unless I can stop. I see something I want to draw and stop, and I draw it like the gal with the pool noodle. Um, if you look out and you say, "Oh, I want to draw," I want to draw that, but I'm going too fast. That doesn't happen with me. I always have time, mostly have time to stop. Or if I missed it, I can turn the bike around and go up on the sidewalk. You can't do that with a car.
No,
Right.
no.
Uh, so
Yeah.
that's the main reason. There's a very small environmental reason, but mostly I know that my riding a bike isn't going to stop. And by the way, I was talking, go back to a little bit talking about the cults,
Hmm.
the tribe, the tribal thing. And one thing that I noticed on my Twitter that I have followers who are libertarian or right wing,
Hmm.
um, and they frequently just like spout out, there's no global warming, it's a hoax.
Hmm.
Like, no, it is a thing. You look at it in prehistory. If you look at eons, there were times when, and they know this, when the chemical makeup of our atmosphere was different. Just how this planet has evolved. And the times when there's a lot of carbon dioxide up there in the atmosphere, it's been pretty darn hot. And when it's not been up, when there's not been, when it's been captured, trapped in things like coal, the temperature, this is pretty well known. And to deny that is silly.
Right. I want to interject because I want to give a little shout out to Don Lewis and David Parker, who we also interviewed, and they said during the time of what was it,
The Black Plague.
the Black Plague, they discovered by going through a lot of research exactly what you said, that there was a lot of ash in the atmosphere due to volcanoes erupting. So the climate
and noxious gases as
and
well.
noxious gases. So the climate literally did change due to various explosions in on from the earth, which caused which along with other issues and other toxic environmental issues, not environment like the air, the earth, the water, environment like terrain, like how people were living. They were living too close to like dirty water, corrupted water. So this, in combination with the climate, was what caused the Black Plague. So I just wanted to interject that with you because
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
we're not like global warming isn't real. That's not who we are. We're looking. We do like what you just said. We look into the historical context and what happened at this particular time in the planet, on the planet. I remember watching PBS years ago, where during the Salem witch trials, it was in this particular area of the United States that a certain type of mushroom with strong hallucinogenic properties was being grown in the area where these people were all concentrated in this particular area of the United States. So it stood to reason that it was the environment that was causing these girls to go crazy and see things and call everybody witches, So, I mean, I think that you're onto something there, and I think that people who are so dead set against the idea of either global warming or climate change need to get some historical perspective, and then
Well, yeah, but I see what they're doing, which is they're basically signaling that their tribal, their
yeah,
Right.
right,
tribal affiliation, just the same way as when the leaked the leaked Supreme Court decision happened. Then people, instead of doing a more detailed, more you know, and
Nuance,
I'm
pronounce.
definitely totally pro-choice,
Mhm.
as far as jabs do, but no, there was no discussion about the problem of being pro-choice on abortion and not pro-choice on jabs, jab mandates. So there's a lack of, but what it comes down to is this kind of tribal allegiance now that people don't really think. They just they signal. They put out a Ukrainian flag or whatever the current thing is.
Right.
They can signal to other people that their allegiance to a particular tribe.
With no historical context that, journalists like Eva Bartlett and Vanessa Mealy go into great detail, go telling you about the historical context of the rise of basically Nazism in the Ukraine. So I see friends around here in this area of Pittsburgh where we live that have plastered the Ukrainian flag all over their social media pages. And I'm thinking, do you even know what you're doing?
Now, on the other hand, there are a lot of Ukrainians around here. We have a Ukrainian church just over the other side of this ridge,
right?
And so there are a lot of Ukrainian born or Ukrainian, not nationals, but people of Ukrainian descent. But that said, at the same time, it's like, well, but
you never put your flag over your social
exactly
media page
before, right? Right.
So
we exactly, yeah. It's this has become a thing. Is this tribal thing? Whereas people used to be. I remember when people were a little more open to shades of gray. That this is possibly not a conflict we should be even involved in. We're not involved in a lot of conflicts throughout the world, but suddenly we're supposed to at a time when people are living intense on our sidewalks when there's a massive opioid problem. But these kind of discussions where you say, well, there's a proportionality. There's maybe this is more important than that. Maybe we should be a little more selfish and do something for Americans before we do something for people in a place where we can't even find it on a map.
Right.
Having that kind of discussion, they'll just say, well, obviously, Ken, you hate Ukrainians, or you're a racist, or
you're pro-Putin.
You're pro-Putin.
Oh, Putin, yeah, I forgot about that one. But if there are many, I mean, not many, but quite a few much better than I can who can explain this whole thing, like Glenn Greenwald or Max Blumenthal, that a lot of this relates back to what happened in 2016 with that they could not begin to talk about the divisions in our own society, the professional managerial class and the working class, as well as the fact that we're largely a post-industrial society. Not saying that industrial societies are, I'm very much, a lot of my ideas come from Ivan Illich, which a lot of people don't read anymore, but he said there were problems with taking an industrial approach to many of our problems, medical education. He wrote books on medicine, the problems with hospitals. They hurt a lot of people more than and transportation. He's famous for having said that the democracy can't travel. Democracy moves at the speed of a bicycle, 7 miles an hour, so 12 miles an hour. But his point was that there was a time when you could do everything within walking distance, everything that you needed to do. And now there are places you can stand and see where you want to go, but there's a highway in front of it and parking lots and everything. So it's hard. That's Ivan Illich wrote that in the 70s, and he pretty much predicted everything that's happening right now.
Right.
That our healthcare industries doesn't serve people anymore. It hurts people, actually.
Right.
People. Our transportation system kills people, and in America, it's horrible. You can't even take trains anywhere. Our trains are. Bulgaria has much better trains than us.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with James Howard Kunstler. I illustrated one of his books. cover one of his books. But yeah, James Howard Kunstler is a good one when it comes to transportation and a lot of other things. But he's the moment I'm kind of a fan of the not a fan bad word. I mean a student of people who write about collapse because I think that's where we are in the midst of that. What does collapse look like? There's some wonderful authors. I think James Howard Kunstler is very good, and he has his website. Um, and also, there's some others. Understanding collapse. Yeah, we're in the process of where everything is sort of falling apart, and in a very you could almost predict how this is going. I mean, it has a lot to do with energy, which we're seeing now, food production. So if people are interested in that sort of thing, a lot of my ideas come from Dmitry Orlov is another good author. He has a book called Reinventing Collapse, and it's about the experience largely of what happened in Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. Is how did people, and we're going to see some of that here. I think we're already seeing that. We're already seeing food shortages, rampant inflation. I just finished reading a book about inflation in the Weimar Republic in the 20s. Right. Very important. I was interested is like, what do you do to adapt to a situation where you're pretty much wiped out financially? What do you do? How do you eat? How do you buy? How do you get services? How do you get, And so I think it's important for people to start looking. Do your own research. I have a neighbor who was a staunch professional managerial class liberal Democratic Party person, and during Halloween he put a skeleton in his doorway, and had a sign on it. It said, "I did my own research."
Oh my God!
And yeah, I know this guy, and he was a person I could get along with before, but now it's like, of course.
I really hate that smug, self-congratulatory sense of humor that these people have adapted.
Right.
They're adopted.
Yeah.
It's really disgusting, and I really I hate it.
Right.
But if you bring up anything, in your opinion, they're just going to just throw it right back at you like that.
Well, the idea, I think the whole concept of make sure you do your own research and make sure you look at all arguments and stuff. I think that's good, but unfortunately, it's gotten us away from the basic foundation of what it means to be human, which is that you have a choice and you can say no. And so I don't care if people want to throw volumes of evidence against, at me that either masks do work or they don't work, or that the COVID shot does work or it doesn't work, or that it's a bioweapon or that it's just a flu shot, or it's a placebo. I don't really care. I don't want it, so I'm not going to take it. And that's and that has to do with being a human being.
I agree. It's a very vital. I mean, you can spend a lot of your time going down rabbit holes, which I have. And how much artwork would I have done if I had? But I was kind of in a lot of ways forced to do my own research and go down the rabbit hole, which I deeply resent because I was just enjoying life before.
Yeah, I know, right? Same here.
I never wanted to become a virologist or an epidemiologist, but we all had to become one, right?
Right.
They were telling us to.
I know we had to become our own experts. Right. I really want to. We have about 15 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is play. If you're okay with this, play a portion of your dystopian outlook on what's happening, because that's really what grabbed our attention and what. So when you just for the audience sake, just to give you a little background, we interviewed C.J. Hopkins. A couple days later, we get this great email from Ken Avidor. We had never heard of him before. So I started watching your videos. I started looking at your content, and oh my gosh, you do your own you do your own voiceover work, you do all of the video sketching, you do all of the cartooning, you construct this thing, and it's so well made. And it's such a riveting story. I found myself going, okay, what happens next? So which is what you want, when you're creating something, you want your audience to, to really respond. Is he frozen?
Yeah.
Go ahead and I'll give you some context.
Okay.
Great.
All right. So this is part 3. This is a portion of part 3. I'm going to play this now. Let's see. All right. Let me play it.
We came to a clearing in the forest. The sentries walked to the edge of the clearing and stood guard as a camouflaged hatch opened. This was the entrance to a maze of tunnels leading to an underground complex of shelters, kitchens, barracks, armories, and hospitals. I climbed down the shaft, careful to avoid the booby traps that Ellie warned me about. Ellie and I reported to the base commander, Roger Dexter. Everyone called him Roger. He stood behind a desk covered in maps. Roger looked up as we entered the bunker. After Ellie introduced me, Roger began telling me his story. Before the event, that's what he called it, the event, Roger had been a white-collar worker. He managed to keep his job even though he refused the jab. Roger worked from home, only venturing out to buy food and other essential chores. But one day he was stopped by a health department cop, demanding his papers. Before Roger had a chance to find his papers, Roger was jumped by the other health department cops who strapped a medical mask on his face and forced him into a van. The van traveled a long way out into the country. Roger had no idea where they were taking him. After several hours, the van arrived at Camp Wellrest, a brand new quarantine camp surrounded by a high fence with razor wire. Roger stayed in a comfortable bungalow in which he was required to stay inside, except for 1 hour of recreation on his front porch. But at all times he was required to wear a mask. After the final lockdown was imposed, rebellions broke out in cities across the country. Counterinsurgency measures were brutal. Cities were destroyed, infrastructure ruined, populations decimated. Roger was transferred to a makeshift facility, a shopping mall repurposed as a prison. His head was shaved and he was told to share a filthy room packed with other prisoners. Roger was now assigned with the task of clearing rubble with his fellow prisoners of the bombed and burned cities. The work needed to be done by hand since fuel for bulldozers and trucks was in very short supply. Roger labored clearing bricks and debris from collapsed buildings. At night, he was kept awake by the screams of inmates being tortured and beaten. Rebellious and weak inmates were subjected to forced injections. None survived more than a few weeks. Roger organized a revolt of the inmates. After executing the guards and confiscating their weapons, ammunition, and other supplies, they marched across the landscape of ruined cities and towns, fighting the mechanized, heavily armed health department counterinsurgency units. Eventually, the rebels, with Roger as their leader, came to this forest. After telling me his story, Roger looked at me and asked if I was ready to join them on a raid the next day. I said, hell yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We were off mic.
Muted. So
we were muted.
That's Unjabbed, and you can find that on YouTube. So please subscribe to that YouTube channel.
All I can add to that is have a nice day. No, yeah, that is it's fiction. It's some, they used to have this when I was growing up. There, you would see this movie posters, and sometimes it would say torn from today's headlines.
Right.
Meaning that there was something that everybody was concerned about, like nuclear war or whatever, and they would make a movie about it. So if it was about nuclear war, it would very often be about giant ants living in the sewers of Los Angeles, or people, the Incredible Shrinking Man. A lot of this has kind of gone out of our culture, is that the idea of riffing on things that are happening, particularly the things having to do with injections,
Right.
the vaccines. Um, so I'm probably it. Just like with my video Maz alone, it's the only thing. It's probably the only video out there, film, about abrupt climate change, which is a possibility. I'm not saying it. But if you used to look at culture, the film industry, television, art, and it was always riffing on things that were of concern for people at that time. Comics, there's so many, the underground comics, which are completely gone now. I mean, it's not the same thing. A lot of those subjects were, you know, talked about, and not always in like if they have a happy ending. Now everything has to have a hallmark happy ending, and you can't. There's some subjects you can't touch with a 10-foot pole anymore. We have now the culture of of a place like North Korea, which reminds me. I got to tell one story that has to do with this. Is there have been periods in my life that have been very much like this, and I think when you think about the ramp up to the or the period post the Bush era when we had the war on terror, and I think it was 2003. I was doing some, I like to do the dystopian thing. It's something that appeals to me. And what I wanted to do was a drawing with of a devastated suburban landscape, because you see devastated urban landscapes, but I like cities. I like cities. What I don't like is suburbs.
Right. Same here.
So I like to imagine, so you see the Golden Arch kind of in.
Yeah, I noticed that with the light fixtures or the overhead lights, the highway lights, and then the golden arches kind of like destroyed in the background of that last scene.
When I'm in the suburbs, I take in all of that stuff. I sketch, take photographs, because it's the details.
Right.
It's the little things. Those street lights or the cell phone towers. Those you show those in you show those or shopping malls in disrepair or destroyed, and it's the effect on people is just wonderful. And me too. So in this particular, I had to find. This was 2003, so there were these new kinds of billboards that are ubiquitous now. There's a single massive pole with the billboard text. It used to be kind of a lattice work of metal. Those are gone. But this was new. So I want to have like this actual realistic things that people see in their landscape, everyday landscape. They don't actually see them. But when they see it in the drawing, it gives it that feeling of authenticity. So I got on my bike, and on the edge of downtown, there was, I was living in Minneapolis at the time. On the edge of downtown, there was one of these billboards. So I started, I took pictures and I started sketching. It's two different ways I learned to understand what I'm looking at. And a car pulled up with a security guard in it, and he said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Can't do what?" He says, "You can't draw and photograph the parking garage where that." And I said, "I'm not doing that. I'm doing the billboard that's in front of the parking garage." He says, "You still can't do that." And so I thought I'd have a little fun with him. So I said, "Is it because I'm using the wrong medium? Should I use gouache?" and he said no. And he's holding onto the steering wheel and looking straight at it. And he says no. I said, "Well, how about oils?"
Yeah.
And then I went through the whole pastels,
color pencil.
Everything. And after a while, he said, I said, "Oh, obviously it's not the medium. It's me. I'm the wrong artist for this, right?" I said, "Would you let Rembrandt do this?" Let Rembrandt sketch, the billboard. He said, "No." I said, what about Picasso? What about Van Gogh? By that point, he says, "I'm calling the cops."
Wow.
And I said, "Great, call the cops." So now, he's got the light going on his car, and then the cops are right, they have their light going, and people are like amassing to see what this little guy with his sketchbook did.
And his bicycle.
Yeah, and the bicycle, right, which makes me really suspicious. And so the cops go off with the security guard a ways, and I see them. He's talking to them, and he's telling them some like amazing tale about how he caught me, signaling with my sketches to Osama bin Laden or something.
Right.
And so, and they keep turning, and they look at me. They do this. They look at me, and they go, "You mean him? That guy? He did that?" So he's spinning a tale, and then the cops walk over slowly,
as they do. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're obviously, they're in full like, get me out of here, please, God, this is ridiculous. And I'm just about to launch into my First Amendment thing, and
they're waiting for that.
Cop says, "Look, I know what you're going to say, and you know something? You're right." He says, "You have every right to do what you're doing."
Right.
He says, "However," he says, "people are kind of on edge these days. They're anxious, He says, "Can you make our job easier and don't draw ugly things?" He says, "Draw nice things." He says, "There's a rose garden not too far from here. Can you go there and draw pretty pictures of roses? Can you, and then he says, or some like nice landmark that everyone loves." And he looks around and he points to the tallest building in downtown Minneapolis and says, "Why don't you draw the IDS building?" And in my head, it's like, wait a minute, this all started with planes crashing into buildings, and now I'm
right. And now you want me to draw a tall building?
Right. No, you'd get more attention doing that.
That would draw more attention to you.
So he's finally, we get into the real, and it's a lot like what's going on now, which is, why don't you do what's conventional, what's not going to upset people, what's not. And I just do the opposite.
Wow.
There's a whole world of subject matter that can be done, that needs to be explored. If I'm the only person who can do it, then I'm going to do it. And if nobody wants to watch it, I don't care. To me, one of my heroes is Rod Serling, who did the Twilight Zone, and actually a lot of other really great stuff. And he felt that, the cold chill of censorship when he was doing his work. I think he was I'm not sure. I think Twilight Zone was the first TV show to have the Vietnam War. It was
okay.
He tackled a lot of subjects. A lot of subjects that were very disturbing to people, and presented them in a way that in a form, a fictional form that people could relate to. We need more of that, in my opinion. That's the stuff I respond to. If I see somebody, tearing torn from the headlines of today, which are not paper. It's kind of a really anachronistic thing, talking about papers. But you know what I mean. Is that, please, if you really feel like that it's worth it as an artist, get out of your room and stop drawing your breakfast. And there's a world out there of things that need to be interpreted and documented, and someday someone's gonna look back and say, where were those artists who commented on that? And what was their point of view? Does everybody have the same point of view? Of course not.
Right.
Well, I think something, you pointed out, you brought up Rod Serling, and I think, given the situation now, I think then as in now, the main focus of moving people or manipulating people is conformity. We're seeing a massive push again towards, making people conform. I mean, they've been doing this, the ruling class have been doing this for centuries, but I think it's like this last big push to get everybody over to, a very conformist, you're going to act and behave the way we want you to behave. And you can't color outside of the lines. The only way you'll be able to color outside of the lines is in the way that we tell you to color outside of the lines.
Or if you're part of our class, then you're allowed to color.
They call that the controlled opposition, which we see them. But I just want to add one more thing, is that historically, it's the most authoritarian countries where the regimes that have a kind of artwork that's very conformist and actually very. If you think about ancient Egypt, where everyone was like walking,
Right. That's
flat,
cyclistic,
it's
yeah.
not like that people didn't have perspective when they viewed. They had perspective in they understood it,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't see it in the artwork. It's just like you don't see comics outside of the people with the capes and the spandex.
Right.
Right.
You step back and take a look at our culture. It is in many ways just as rigid and weird as now. You may recall that in Roman times, form, perspective, the human anatomy came back in art, and then it was lost again during the great authoritarian, well, not author, but rigid thinking of the Dark Ages, and then in the Renaissance it came back again because people were open to like, well, maybe people don't actually they walk with their feet on the ground, you know. And remember, all that time during the Middle Ages, people were walking around the ruins, like in Italy. They walked around the ruins of Rome, and they saw, they see, statues sticking out of the ground. And they knew that there was that at one time there was a different way of looking and portraying, and so we have that right now. I think that if you look back at different times, we've had similar times in the 1950s with McCarthyism. We had that kind of rigidity in our culture. Certain subjects were not allowed. Certain people were not allowed to express themselves. We go in and out of this. The pendulum swings back and forth. I'm doing my bit to keep, at least with myself. And remember, I don't do the call to action thing, but I find my life is more interesting, and I meet wonderful people like you when I ask questions in my art, when I portray what's in my mind, how I feel about what I see.
Right.
It's not always that I'm going to connect with other people in the same way, but at least they will see how I see myself at that time in a very, what I think is honest. And that's what I do. That's what I do.
I'm glad you used the word honest, because so many people are out there yelling or using the word truth as opposed to honesty.
Right.
And I think that because we've said outright in one of our videos, and we've said it on a number of other times, is we do not feel like we are telling the truth. We are not of that, we're not saying we're truthers or that we have the truth. We have our own truth, but what we have is an honesty with ourselves of what we interpret is going on, and we say, what we think is going on, but it's not necessarily your truth. If you agree with it, you're welcome to, but you can also disagree with what we say as well.
Now you recall that I've spent a lot of time in courtrooms where the concept of truth is it's an interesting concept. It's they know that everyone's point of view and their background and what they call foundation can determine how you see the truth. And if you understand, it's a fascinating thing to spend time in courtrooms to understand that it's a search for some kind of legal truth.
Right.
Which often is what a reasonable, the term reasonable man or reasonable person from the facts would determine, but they never ever say that something. There's been plenty of cases where we know that with the Innocence Project, plenty of cases where people have been found innocent after everyone was totally convinced the person was guilty.
Right.
People have been executed, and so you have to be humble.
Right.
When you talk about the truth, you have to be humble and understand that the truth is different in different eras and different times. But you can know how you feel, what you feel in your gut.
Right.
A gut feeling. You say this is not right. This person is this person's blinking too much when they talk to me.
Right.
They're hiding something or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when it's time to stop. Don't go headlong into some. Don't go headlong into that lynch mob. Don't go headlong into this horrible abysmal thing that the group decision thing. Take some time, step back. There's always time to change your mind. You'll get, so many scams are involved in, like the used car guy who says, this car isn't going to be on the lot tomorrow.
Right.
My doctor said to me, if you don't take this jab, I'm going to see you in. I hope I don't see you in the intensive care unit. And I said, well, if you do see me there, I said, if you do see me there, you can say I told you so.
Right.
She didn't mention it the last time. She's a good doctor, really excellent doctor. But that's what they're telling her, is that if your patients do not take this jab, you might see them in the intensive care unit in a matter of weeks or months.
Wow.
And I think
all of our institutions are compromised.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down to two subjects that we talked about today. Authority.
Mm-hmm.
And honesty. I think honesty is a good word, to describe, what we need to bring forth in the world, rather than just going along with, what people tell us to do.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that I so much enjoy this conversation, because I think that all of us have been, honest with each other, and you can't argue with someone who's telling you how they feel about things. That's your feeling. You are, that's how you feel about it, and you've done your. I'm not gonna. There's too much of this. Like, I don't argue with people anymore, because it's pointless, because people have already made up their minds for the most part. I miss talking to people, exploring subjects. I think today. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, great. Well,
yes, it's been so wonderful having you.
And we've enjoyed talking to you as well. And thank you for coming on to Pull Quote and showing us your work and talking about what's going on in your world and your perspective on the last few years in what I call the CVD.
Right.
You call the event.
I see so many similarities and correlations. We left San Francisco in late 2018, in August of 2018. And then a year and a half later, suddenly we had, the national emergency declared. You left Minneapolis, which is a very San Francisco type of city, with this, sort of, there's a lot of money, liberals with money that live there. It's a really progressive city like San Francisco. But you were describing, your interaction with the security guard and then the police, and all I kept thinking to myself was, Minneapolis is fascist. I've been there once in the late 80s. I went to go see a concert, and I was really young, and I took like a Greyhound bus, and so I spent, probably 4 days in Minneapolis, and it was beautiful. And I went to Prince's First Avenue and saw a concert there, and you're familiar with that place. And and it was super fun. But I think what we witnessed in the summer of 2020 with the strange burning, the stories of the burning buildings and stuff. Do you remember that in Minneapolis? I
have been inside those buildings many times. We lived there for 30 years in that neighborhood. And I just see there's a police station that had a community room that I'd been in dozens of times. That is doing the transportation stuff, and it was just heartbreaking. Roberta and I just sat there and cried when we saw those places burn. That was it was a wonderful city at one time, but it's much changed, and this has happened to many other cities. San Francisco and Los Angeles, where my family, there's a lot of my family, and New York. Your interview with Helen
Buiniski.
Yes, it's just heartbreaking, because that's where Roberta and I met. We met at Parsons School of Design.
Oh, wow.
And I lived in Manhattan. I grew up. I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up in Westchester, and I have lived and I have gone to school in Manhattan, and it's just heartbreaking. I love that city. I love San Francisco. Unbelievable to see the pictures coming out of these places.
I know. Well, there's other things too. Like, I know that not everything that we see is is the whole picture.
Right.
But I think the whole picture says that if there are pockets of San Francisco or Minneapolis that are falling apart, then that means that there's larger corruption that is allowing it to disintegrate in those particular pockets. And so who benefits from all that corruption? Why is that happening? And we're noticing that like former district supervisors of ours, like Dean Preston, has suddenly completely changed his outlook, and he's in bed with corporate interests, with social movement organizations in San Francisco that, we would not support at all. Like, we know personally that some of these homeless advocacy project type places or the tenants union, they're basically covers for money laundering, and this is from personal experience, that I could see this. So it's just sad to see this sort of behind the scenes destruction, which again shows that places like Minneapolis and San Francisco and Seattle are seats of empire that are like they're the tentacles, so you have DC in the middle, and then you have these tentacles, in these predominantly liberal cities that are squeezing the life force out of what were once, cultural meccas and cities that people would rush to, like Minneapolis.
I think also, these little pockets that you're talking about, we are only seeing these little pockets for a reason,
right,
like you said, but I think it's also propaganda opportunities, right? Because we talk about propaganda a lot here, but I think that these are also the means of telling you this is what's going to happen to your town too, if not if you don't do anything. It's inevitable.
Like,
right?
It's going to happen.
So, we're showing you what's happening, and people either take it as, they get outraged, or they're like, well, oh, well.
Right. Or they just if you have money, then you just leave.
Right.
So
it's a lot of, there's a lot of different messages that are coming out of this form of propaganda. And, like Austin Fitz, what's her name?
It's real estate acquisition.
She was talking about how the burnings were real estate acquisition. She's like, if you look at the map, and you see where the fires took place, it looks like real estate acquisition, not like random violence.
And it's the same thing with the smash and grabs going on in San Francisco. That's all about real estate acquisition, so that these Walgreens stores or some of these other stores can shut down, and you can get more real estate interest to take over those spaces very cheaply. So it's all about, there's a lot of different factors involved, but one of the first factors we noticed was the real estate aspect to this. Anyway.
Well, I think I agree. And it would take and it would take another hour for me to talk about my experiences, but my conclusion of what a lot of people don't understand Minneapolis, because it's quite a ways distance, but it has supply to many people. There's the fellow Thomas Friedman, I think, who writes for the Times, comes from Hopkins, which is right outside of. So it provides a lot of that. I think San Francisco is one of those places where it's not like this, major powerhouse, but it provides. You also have the Silicon Valley, which has Stanford, outsized influence, but also extremely captured by very, very corrupt forces that we barely understand. And you go down that rabbit hole, that would take about maybe 3 hours for me to talk about.
Right. Yeah. Well,
everything is not what and everything.
It's
not what you think it is. So.
Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely going to double down on San Francisco, particularly being a seat of empire, because the former San Francisco district attorney is now the VP of the United States. So,
and the Speaker of the House is from San Francisco.
And the Speaker of the House is from San Francisco.
We think of it as DC West.
It's literally DC West. So. I mean, I really feel, and plus the United Nations was signed in San Francisco,
right.
So
it was founded there. Yeah,
founded there. So
interesting things go on in that Bay Area there.
Yeah, some pretty weird stuff. So, but I just want to say that it's been so nice meeting a fellow cyclist who's on the right side of history, which is a rare
occurrence.
A rare occurrence. It's a real gem, and we're just so thrilled that you came on today and got to share your work with our followers who may not have heard of you. I have a friend who's from Indiana. I know that he texted me and he said, "Oh, Ken Avidor, this guy?" I said, "Yeah, we're going to have him on." So he's like, "Wow, great." So, it's nice to see that there are other people from other parts of the country, not just Los Angeles or San Francisco, that are starting to speak up and have an influence, people like you. So we're really, really honored that you came and spent some time with us today.
Well, thank you. This has been so much, so therapeutic for me to talk to people like yourself. Yeah, and and I encourage everyone to watch your videos. They're fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah,
thank you for that. Yeah,
thanks. And we'll put the links to your sites. Your what is it? The Stack,
right?
Substack, yeah.
Substack, and your YouTube video channel as well. And
very quickly, can we just show Bicycyclopolis on
sure.
Twitter?
Yeah,
so we can, some of our Twitter followers can
if you follow me on if you follow @Avidor on Twitter, that's my opinions and that sort of stuff. But if you want to look at my art, it's the Bicyclopolis.
Okay. Excellent. So, please follow Ken either here or at the other one as well.
And Avidor,
we'll include all the links for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Great. Okay. Oh, okay.
You
gotta go away. Okay, there we go. Well, cool. Well, thank you again, and I'm glad. Thank you for showing another side of your family art. Right. So you've got you're in front of Roberta's paintings. And
you can follow her on Instagram.
Okay, cool.
Okay, excellent.
Roberta Avidor.
Great.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thanks, Ken. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Cool. Wow. All right. Well, once again, the time has like flown.
Right.
And we get into these conversations and it's like, time just passes. And
it really does. And we're so honored that he agreed to come on and talk to us, and we're so happy that he reached out to us.
Yeah.
And so a special thank you to CJ Hopkins for introducing us to new people in the artist community.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. It was really refreshing for me to see somebody like Ken is actually doing the work. So that's good. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you. We're going to continue the series. We're coming up next is going to be Paul Kudnak from Winter Oak, who was mentioned earlier.
We'll have him on again.
And and we'll see how things go from there. So thank you again for joining us on Pull Quote, and we'll see you again another time.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Pull Quote is made possible by our patrons and supporters. You can help us continue to do the work that we do by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Book of Hours. Join Rockfin or leave us a tip at rockfin.com/Book of Hours. Or leave us a one-time donation at paypal.me/Book of Hours. Thank you.